On the rare occasions we could coax my father to eat Chinese food, he would order what he wanted and sit with his arm around the dish, immune to my mother's exasperated comments that Chinese food was for sharing. "I like this," said my dad, often the world's most generous person. So I have to say, as much as I have enjoyed everyone's preaching, and I marvel at our good fortune to have these resources in our church, it's really wonderful to be back in the pulpit. For those who are with us today who didn't come because they saw a notice somewhere that we're going to be speaking about advanced directives and what I still love that Stephen said, life after death. Wrong, but we won't. That'll be the next week, I guess. New speaker, unless Megan, you have something we don't know. So this isn't our usual. We don't always sing hymns in minor keys. Although that Finlandia, you sounded fabulous as always. Today, I want to talk about ill health, decline, and death, particularly as something that happens within a family and within a community. In very real ways, we are family to one another. We wait with joyful anticipation for the Campbell baby to arrive. We fret over illnesses among this community and our family and our friends. We mourn with and for each other, communities of faith, particularly ones this size, our extended family. So how do we serve each other as families in these moments of challenge and heartbreak? We can learn from one another, allow people's experience to guide our own actions. Part of the cost I pay for membership here is to fret over you and pray over you, even when I'm not sure where I'm directing those prayers and whether or not you'd like me to be doing that. And I have to say that it was normally, I'm on a topic and I go, and I have rewritten this sermon 3 times. The first time I had to rewrite was after I'd gotten to the end of it and realized I had managed to avoid speaking about the topic. This is something I do a lot of, and yet it was like, oh. So I hope I have this story right, Brian. But the other week, Avery was on a hayride with her parents, and someone talked about a cemetery and explained that people went there when they died. Avery turned to her parents, horror-stricken, and asked, "People die?" I hadn't really thought about death as something that needed to be taught. But of course it is, especially to littles who are just learning about life. It is the cost of life. It's the price of admission. We worry about, make sure we're okay, I think there. We worry about their finding out about Santa or Tooth Fairy, but somehow don't manage to put death on the list of things to teach them. But they want to know. Jen Curley posted the other day wondering about a good book to help kids with dead people. Bess wanted to see them. She's not sure exactly what Bess meant by that, nor does she sure that Bess knows what she wants. And when most of us think about life's ending, we think, oh, I'll die in my sleep. But few of us do. Hard-headed pragmatists in most of our lives, too many of us still embrace that fairy tale. When you look at health industry costs and see how much of the money in healthcare goes towards prolonging life, usually for a very short time with very little quality and for very elderly people, you have to stop and think. At least for a little while, and then too often it becomes uncomfortable contemplation and we look away. We get busy. And yet, if we don't look at death, we won't be prepared. And we always need to look at preparation, and we need to look at death. We need to look at preparation in a lot of ways. We need to plan for our families with wills and insurance. Note to self, my last will was written when I had a job in the city, some prospects, and very little Swedish crystal. I want us to begin to think about creating a book of comfort. I finally decided that's what it should be called, a book of comfort. I'm sometimes envious of the ease of ministers from other traditions who simply whip out their prayer book and prayers for the dying and give comfort. UU ministers often encounter what I did with Charlie. He was so glad to see me when I came, happy for the companionship and the love. But as I was holding his hand, he waved his other hand around peremptorily. No prayers, okay? It's like, okay. In the end, he died not long after singing How Much Is That Doggie in the Window with Clayton. So it seems we should have a book with lovely words and songs to linger in our ears. What do you want to hear? What do you want never to hear? What hymns or songs do we want on our UU song track? We should hear what comforts us. We need to talk at some point about the hymns and readings you might want, whether you want a funeral or memorial, whether you want to be cremated or buried. It gives us all one last group of actions we can take on your behalf. And that is so reassuring to family, intimate and extended. But today, the realities of death in its various messy styles of arrival are what we need to examine. UUism is not particularly helpful when it comes to dying. If you look at our principles, there's nothing about life and its milestones, and nothing about death and its realities. There's no talk about suffering and the need to minimize it. Most of us are science-driven, and we see illness and accidents through that lens. We don't worry, as some do, that illness and accident are a result of sin, yet it's easy to succumb to the notion of unfairness of some things, which are not really unfair, but still are awful. There were a couple of long paragraphs here that sort of wandered around like this. I have to say I'm not very clear on this. It probably needs to become a sermon and perhaps not one that I preach. So I'll say this. I don't do a lot of systematic theology, but I can see that there might be room for at least some agreement on the kinds of discussions to be encouraged, both at our local and institutional levels. For the moment, we should acknowledge that we have fairly incomplete and unhelpful metaphors for dealing with suffering and death. For the purpose of this sermon, I found an expert at the casino last night. You never know what you're going to find at that casino. So for those of you who weren't here, you don't know what you missed. But I talked to Al Lumpkin, and I don't know how many years Al has taught seminarians and others about the art of being a chaplain. 27 years, so that makes Al an old guy, but we won't mention that. I don't know how many. All right, so Al taught 27 years, chaplains and others about the art of being a chaplain. But it's all right, he's not only very wise, but he also has an incredible knack to talk about things and reduce them down to simple sentences. He had 4 tidbits for me. Here are the first 2. Death is the ultimate crisis, which causes people to struggle with what they value most highly and believe most deeply. It is death that creates the dynamic tension in life and creates the motivation and a sense of urgency to do the things that matter. His not-so-pastoral aside was that if we don't pay some attention to it, or if we didn't know these things about death, we'd wind up being a lot like Elsie the cow in the field. So, death and suffering are not iffy things. They are an inevitable part of our lives. We need to talk about them and prepare for them as best we are able. Death will come along, and it's so much easier if you've had the hard conversations at a time when you're not in pain or facing ultimate realities. You may change your mind when it comes to that moment, but at least you'll know how to talk about things. You've broken the taboo. These things need to be talked about. The reading group just finished a book entitled Everyone Dies Alone. Al's take was a little different. Death is always a personal, but rarely a private experience. Family and friends, if you're lucky, often medical staff, social workers, clergy, may be part of your decision-making, of your illness, and your process of dying. We want to be able to hold those conversations, and our beloved must be able to hear our needs. And having those words of wisdom makes it easier too, I think, not only to be dealing with what's going on, but to listen then when nursing staff or doctors or whoever's there puts their hand on your shoulder and says, this is happening now. And so you can open to that because you're not just doing this. We want to be able to hold these conversations ourselves, and our beloved must be able to hear our needs. Only then can they partner with us in our journey. So we need to know not only what we want, we need to know what our intimates want and need. Al again. Strictly speaking, we cannot be with someone who is in the process of dying, except to the degree with which we have dealt with the implications of our own death. There's no replacing talking about this. Too many of us have been called to be present to people injured, ill, or dying. If we're lucky, the one who is sick has created clear-cut directives that match their exact experiences, and we can discern exactly what we should do. But often things aren't that straightforward, and if people haven't done this work, there are ghastly moments when you must figure out answers to ultimate questions while coping with the agony of your beloved friend, family member, or partner. It's good for those of us who watch and wait and pray. Often nothing is or seems clear-cut. There's a lot of, well, maybe if you tried this, then that might work, that comes at you from the medical establishment. And many of us, despite clear start down the, well, let's just try this one thing track, which, gets you off on another track altogether. But we still wind up having to fall back on the, this is what they wanted and asked for. Having conversations about illness and death, or having had conversations about illness and death, makes it easier in times of trauma and fear. We need to consider how moving toward death can actually be honoring life. We're all going to be at different points on the spectrum. We're UUs, after all. But what makes us community is having talked to one another about these decisions, having sought to understand why some have chosen one thing that may be so different from what we've chosen. We are UUs when we allow those positions to work on us, to transform us. We are family when we support each other in having our wishes known and honored, even when those choices would not have been ours. In the face of his illness, Randy Pausch made one choice and lived into that beautifully. We all know many people who have chosen to suck the marrow from the bone of life to enjoy what was possible. However it was, Pausch managed his pain and his sadness at leaving his family and lived life as fully and with as much fun as he could. But we don't get to demand that of everyone. People do what they can. They are who they are. I believe that most of us, especially in the face of extreme challenge, do the very best we can. Not all diseases seem manageable to all people. Many of us have seen the recent story of the 29-year-old in Oregon who made the decision to die. Oregon. I lived in California so many years, I still don't know how to pronounce that word. She made a video about her choices and her reasons behind those choices. She picked a date. Closer to the time, she backtracked and said, I'm not quite ready. And then she was. She wasn't interested in dying, but living was too painful for her. For her. We get worried about how many people might exercise these options. In all the years Oregon has had assisted suicide, fewer than 1,000 people have requested such prescriptions, and fewer than half of them have filled the prescriptions and then chosen to die. Another woman wrote about her partners having made that decision while suffering with another particularly agonizing cancer. She talked about how painful she found her partner's choice, but how well she understood that it was, in fact, her partner's choice and desire. And that's the job in relationship, isn't it? To hear what our beloved desire and to support them in that, even when it's painful for us. Because we can't know what our dear ones can stand. Even if we believe they can do more or should do more, we can't know. We each get to decide what honors life and demand that our lives are honored in those ways. The options run the gamut from every intervention to no intervention, from moderate responses to ultimate decision. We get to choose, for them sometimes. But I believe that the conversations about the value of life, the rigors of healing, and the realities of death are a form of prayerful interaction. They are holy conversations that accept, embrace, and celebrate the sacredness of existence. There are more aspects to this sacred conversation than we will visit today. There's another woman who wants to come and have an evening program about healthcare decisions. I know a lawyer and can probably find a finance guy if you'd like to listen to some options about estate planning and planning for your children. I've said before I'm happy to keep a copy of your advance directives at my office if you need me to pick them up on my way to the hospital. When I mentioned that possibility on Facebook, Jean Weston's daughter-in-law, who was a very strong advocate for Jean during her death, cheered. There was that day when the hospital couldn't find the advance directive in the midst of decision-making. And as I was driving here, thinking about that, I thought, no, you have to have an app for that. You have to have an app for that. What the heck is this? It needs to be on your smartphone, and you need to have all of your families on your smartphone. And when they say, here I am, you go click, and it goes right into the computer, Anne, catching up. So get on that, will you? Yeah, okay. Because I know Geisinger loves to take directive from little individuals. I believe that living our lives fully includes facing our death. If we understand that today is a good day to die, then each day is a day filled with quiet and sometimes raucous joy to balance out the challenges. In knowing that we will also die, we get to make some choices about whether we value the life we have or whether life at all costs is more important. I've said before that making these choices is prayer. I also see them as love. To make these decisions is an incredibly loving act that spares our families and friends and partners at times of great turmoil and chaos. Let us love each other every way we can. Let us protect our loved ones and our wider community with the gifts of our best clarity. Too often everything is already too horrible and too scary. As much as death is part of every life, it is almost always a wrenching truth. There is no need to make it more onerous. Let us be clear where we place our value in life, because that also places our value on our loved ones. Let us pray the prayers that are difficult, but let us do that knowing we do so in love and in community. Blessed be.